Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy,
And I'm Kim Sharman.
and we are back with part one of our analysis of data by somebody who's watched our videos. And so if you didn't listen to the introduction, go back and listen to it. It's not super long, but it gives you an overview of what we're talking about. And so what we want to start with is looking at how this mom pulled together this data, because what she did was not bad. So I don't want to convey that she's made any mistakes in this, but oh my gosh, does she have a ton of data? This is just page one of her spreadsheet, where she's listed off all of the various diagnoses she's had by different clinicians. She's got a list of tests that she's had done. And then she's gone in and put in her child's scores and made graphs for it. Now, Kim, when you see all of this, what's your immediate thought as somebody who goes in and looks at diagnostic test scores and all
Well,
of
the
that?
first thing is I want people to know we don't expect you to do this.
No.
You can, even though this is a lot of data, you can still do the skill set that Cindy's trying to teach you with categorization of data compared to skills. That's what we're trying to teach you. So my first thought is, oh my gosh, how do we interpret what this means?
And so you've seen a lot of diagnostic reports relative to other parents who, they go get a school evaluation, they go get a private evaluation, they get two reports, and like, what does this mean, right?
Right.
So this parent, as we showed on that first page of the Excel spreadsheet, has had evaluation after evaluation after evaluation, which we completely understand, because when you look at all of her data, how do you make sense of everything that is here? Now, she's done a great job where if she's got repeated data, she's tried to put it side by side so that she can compare. So for example, this child has had the WISC, the Western Intelligence Scale, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, 5th edition, twice.
The IQ test twice. Okay.
Yeah. And she's gone in to kind of compare the data across the two administrations.
And IQ test data shouldn't change unless you're on ADHD medication the second time, right?
Yes. So let's talk about that for a minute. So most clinicians out there say, hey, you've got an IQ score, it's good. And research suggests that when you take somebody from the general population that doesn't have any learning needs, and you repeat IQ tests, there's what we call a confidence interval, which says, if I were to go back and re-administer this test 2 years later, 5 years later, there's a band of, hey, you had a good day, hey, you had a really bad day. There's a band of scores that we would expect you to fall within. Okay. And so they're called a confidence interval, and they're a confidence interval at the 90th percentile or the 95th percentile, meaning there's a 90% chance if we repeated this, your score would fall in this range, versus there's a 95% chance that it would fall in this range, which is a little bit bigger band. Okay. So what's really interesting about this kiddo, and by the way, so if you remember me talking about T-scores in the previous video for just a minute, these are T-scores, so they look different. So these are not on that metric of 10 or metric of 100. These are on that T-score metric that has a mean of 50. Don't worry about that so much. But and the mom didn't understand how to put in the percentile rank on that because she didn't look at the right table, which I get. Anyhow, as we go down, her son has had the KABC, the differential ability scales, and the WISC, and she's had the WISC twice. Okay.
So
And
3
so,
IQ tests.
yes,
the-
well,
okay.
4 technically.
Yeah.
2 WISCs, a differential ability, and a KABC. So you begin to see some really significant variability that makes no sense. So if you work from the perspective of intelligence scores are stable, if we re-administer the same test again, we shouldn't see this dramatic difference. And what we see here is a really significant change in performance. And you called it out already, and I see this all the time. I see a shift of 7 to 30 IQ points on and off stimulant medication. So I will have a kid that was assessed by another evaluator. The kid comes to me. I take a look at attention and say, hey, I think there's something going on here. We have the child on a stimulant medication. They come back, they repeat the test, and we end up with dramatically different results. So you're looking at a completely different profile. Now, let's talk about that for 1 minute. If you remember the diagram I drew a minute ago, or in the introductory, and I had the bell curve, and we said, hey, if you've got an average IQ, that's your band of what we consider normal variation. However, if your kid's IQ actually sits up here, now that band changes. And so scores here that were previously viewed as okay at this IQ now are a problem with this IQ. So now all of those scores sit out of the range of what we consider normal variation. Suddenly, that reading score, that math score that was okay before here is now a problem. And so this presents a really different interpretation of the data. Does that make sense, Kim, the way that I explained that?
Yes, but I want parents to realize you don't just give ADHD medication to increase your IQ scores. These are kids who really have been diagnosed with ADHD.
Yes.
The point is, it makes a huge impact on your score if you have ADHD and you're not on medication, and it makes a huge impact on whether you qualify for services in your school. And a lot of people don't understand that.
Yes. And I had a psychiatrist suggest that I was trying to juice up a kid by having them go back on stimulant medication. The reality is, you're not suddenly going to know how 2 words are alike. You're not suddenly going to know how to build geometric figures. You're not suddenly going to be able to give a better definition on stimulant medication if that is not your innate ability. Like there's no magical powers that come. What does come is you can focus, you can persist, you don't get distracted, you can follow the instructions, you can note that you didn't put a cube in the correct orientation. Like IQ is this overarching piece, or sorry, not IQ, attention is this overarching piece that plays a role in all assessment, right? So I can't tell if you did poorly on a phonological processing task because you truly have a problem with phonological processing, or because you were inattentive because it looks the same, right? You couldn't respond to the prompt. So then I'm measuring your inattention instead of, do you have phonological processing as a strong base set that you need to learn how to read? Okay. So, and when we look, you see these really significant differences in scores. So on this first verbal comprehension subtest, this kid sits in the low average range. On the second, this kid sits in the high average range. So we move 1 2/3 plus standard deviations up. Okay. Now, part of the conversation that we had with this mother when we talked to her the other day is we wanted to know when this kid, and I missed a block there. I'm going to try and get rid of that. There we go. When this kid finally began to use, and I shouldn't say this kid, when her son began to use stimulant medication to treat his attention, because we see these really different scores and this really different performance. Okay. So she did something great here where she put all of the IQ data together. And she did something really great by putting the dates in. So that's super helpful. Okay. But
We blocked out the dates. Cindy blocked out the dates.
and I blocked out the dates. Now you can see some of them on the charts there, and I'm trying not to show too much of that. But then let's take a look, for example, at her academic testing data. Okay. And so he's had, we're going to hit pause for just a second here. Sorry, I found a few blocks there that weren't blacked out, so I've blacked those out quickly. So back to this academic assessment here. She has then compiled all of her academic testing together. Now, Kim, when you look at this, what problem do you see with that?
When I see the scores significantly go up to the second column, which is the more recent testing, you see a jump.
Okay. What else is difficult for you in all of this?
What else is difficult? Well, there's a lot missing between the two.
Okay, so if I asked you, how do you do in reading? Can you immediately tell me how we did in reading?
Not really.
Why not?
It's very difficult because everything's smushed together.
Yep.
But I meaning there's no specific categories that will help me identify reading itself as a skill set.
Okay. So now let's take a minute and we're going to look at, so this is how I compile test scores. So I have intelligence all in one category. I have verbal memory all in one category. I have visual memory. So I break out individual areas so that I can begin to see patterns in scores. Okay. And you can begin to see what immediately jumps out to you in the area of phonological processing when you look across all the scores.
Well, I kind of freak out because I look at discrepancy, and discrepancy are the standard deviations of his skill set compared to his IQ level.
And
it's huge.
Every score.
Every score. I mean, that's insane.
But suddenly it goes, warning, problem ahead, right?
It's something that has not been addressed, you know.
So, and granted, we have scores from different points in time, but this kid has this giant, what we would call a processing deficit that you dive into when you compile all those scores together. So you want to look for, and you may have to do a little bit of research, when you sit down and look at your kids' test data, you want to clump data together. So you put all of the intelligence scores together, then you put all the rapid naming together, and then you put all the phonemic awareness together. And if they do processing speed, put that together. Now, interestingly, some of the intelligence scores, some tests that we use for intelligence measure more than, or they can be looked at in more than one way. So for example, on the WISC, the coding and symbol search actually tells you it's a processing speed measure. So you could lump it together with other processing speed scores to say, hey, how is my child's processing speed? How quickly can they take information in and do something with it under time constraints? Okay. So you group data based on that. All right. Then when we move into academic areas, again, we see big clusters of data. Now, I organize it this way because when I go in and write reports, the software that I've developed that creates this wonderful test score summary clumps things together for me in a different way. And I haven't done it in my test score summary because otherwise you would have the grade or reading test listed in 3 different areas, and you would have the Wyatt with the reading scores listed in a bunch of different areas. So let me show you how I begin to think of breaking things down.
Wait, Cindy,
So,
can I say something for a second? Those individual names of tests that you were referring to just right now, those are not IQ tests. Those are how do you call them? Subtests, skill set tests.
so I tend to lump things together in intellectual ability. So IQ test is one category. The second major category is what I consider processing tests. And when parents walk in and say, there's a problem in processing, I'm like, yeah, but what kind of processing?
Okay.
So anything that is not an IQ test, but not an achievement test, I lump together in processing.
Oh, and processing means the speed from which you are able to retrieve.
No. Processing is underlying processes that affect your ability to perform. So, for example,
Yeah.
Phonological processing, or rapid automatic naming, or visual motor integration, or visual perception. Those are all processing areas. It drives most people nuts when I say you can have a processing deficit in processing speed. And they look at it and say it's a deficit in speed. And I'm like, the proper title is processing deficit and the proper title is processing speed. So all of those come together under those categories. And the way I was trained to do evaluations, you're looking for a pattern in seeing why a student's academic performance is affected. What processing deficit in these various areas affects a student's reading, affects a student's writing, affects a student's math, affects a student's oral language. So those underlying neurological wiring is when what comes out on the other end in terms of academic achievement.
Okay, one sentence. The first thing when I took my kid when she was in kindergarten, the first test the speech and language pathologist did is a rapid automatic naming test. Cindy, why did she do that?
Because rapid automatic naming is one of the best predictors of poor reading.
That's what she means by processing.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then, when you're thinking about academic areas, I'm typing and thinking simultaneously. My apologies there. I always think about any language-based test. I want it broken into what's happening at the word level, what's happening at the sentence level, and what's happening at the passage level. Okay. So as a parent, what I want you to do would be to go in, look at all of your reading scores, and start with, where is my student's reading at the word level? So that would be real word or letter word ID reading and nonsense word or pseudo word. I want to look and say, how is their performance at the word level? Because when we look at growth and development in reading, you have to read individual words, then those words come together into sentences, and then those words come together in passages. So if I have primary deficits at the word level, it's going to affect everything downstream. Does that make sense?
Yes, and parents often think, well, he can read words, he's memorized these words. Well, what's the problem with that, Cindy?
The problem with that is when you're going to run into words later that if you don't have the underlying skill set to decode, you're not going to be able to read the words. And so that's why we do real word reading and pseudo or nonsense word reading, because the nonsense word reading tells us what an individual's decoding skills are. And the real word reading tells us what words they've memorized often. Now, you can have a high nonsense word decoding and a low real word, or you can have a high real word and a low nonsense. Okay. And those tend to switch with age. And we're going to do another video on that later. And we've talked about real word versus nonsense words in other videos, but we're going to go do a reading video in depth. Okay. Then I go back in and I look at how well does my child read, or how well does a student I'm working with read at the sentence level. So if we were to come in and let's go to our test score summary that I sorted out. Okay. Whoop. And so I would come in and I would say, let's highlight words in yellow. So we've got the word reading here. We've got the pseudo word reading here. We've got the word reading fluency there. And then the test of word reading efficiency, all of those are word level tasks. Okay. So we've got those, we could create a category for those, and then we're looking for patterns in that. Now, ironically, this kid did better on this word reading task than he did on this particular test. He did well on this one, but in general, his efficiency, his real word, his pseudo word, and his word reading fluency are all in the single digit percentile ranks.
Okay? So he did better at the pseudo word, which is the fake words.
One time he did a pseudo word on, and we have not pulled in all of the data on this. That's the one score that was high. All of it said it's still lower than we expect. Right. Okay. So then we want to go in and look at the sentence level. And our challenge here is there's only one sentence level task. Okay. And then finally, and we'll do blue, we want to look at passage level reading. So everything in the gray oral reading test is considered to be passage level. Okay. So we would make all of that blue. If it will let me highlight everything in blue.
So they wouldn't know that gray oral reading is passage level.
Well, that's where you need to watch some videos and talk to some people and get familiar with what things are, right? And then there's the reading comprehension at the passage level. Okay. So that gives you word, sentence, passage. Now, the other comparison I like to make is reading aloud versus reading silently, because that then changes how a student understands material. So, for example, this reading comprehension is different than this reading comprehension, because the reading comprehension on the gray oral reading test, you've read aloud, and on the Weschler, you're reading silently. You can read aloud if you want to, but you're reading silently. And so you can compare between those. The Woodcock-Johnson, all of these are silent. Okay. So the word reading fluency and the sentence reading fluency are silent, where in the Gort and in the Wyatt, let me undo that. The word reading and the pseudo word are oral. And I'm starting to get so much color in here, it's just going to be confusing for people.
So one sentence in explaining why the scores are lower on reading aloud if you might have a reading difficulty.
So when you're reading aloud, you're having to retrieve the word and you're having to produce the word, and it places demands on your working memory. So I will see kids who do relatively well or better on the silent reading comprehension task, because they self-correct in their head or guess based on context in their head for the words that they don't know how to decode, and they can select words out of there to give them context and meaning, so then they can answer the questions based on background knowledge. Where when you do the GORT, the questions are based on what's in the passage, and you have to remember specifically what's in the passage, or you can't answer the questions. Okay.
They're working so hard to read that the comprehension goes to nothing.
Okay. Then on written language, again, we go word, sentence, passage. Okay. Now, when they did the Wyatt on this particular student, they attempted the essay and that's all they said. So he was not able to respond to a passage level prompt, but we can compare his spelling relative to his sentence writing. So there's a spelling and there's a spelling. And then at the sentence level, he's got the writing fluency and then the sentence combining. Okay.
So his scores were worse on the sentence composition than the individual spelling?
Yep.
They're all pretty bad.
Build from word to sentence to passage. Okay. So it begins to give us a basis to think of that. By the way, we can go back and do this same activity in oral language. So we're going to keep yellow as word, green as sentence, and blue as passage. So word definitions is at the, and I did that incorrectly. Word definitions is at the word level, technically kind of spilling over into a sentence level, but not too bad. Word classes is a sentence level task. Expressive vocabulary is, sorry, that word level task. These are all word level tasks. Receptive vocabulary and the PPVT. Multiple meanings, relational vocabulary, memory for words. Technically, that's a, yeah, oral vocabulary, all at word level. Okay. Then we can go in, and there may be a couple in there, but I'm doing this very quickly. Then we can go in and we can look at sentence level. So sentence combining, let's see, conversational skills, sentence assembly, following directions, recalling sentences. These are all sentence level tasks. And finally, we can look at the passage level. So understanding spoken paragraphs, the opus is a passage level task. And then the test of narrative language kind of bridges sentence and passage level. So by doing that, if I can figure out what's going on at the sentence level, is the problem that the student doesn't understand individual words, or is it when the words are combined together, or is it I get lost in a passage? Because then it tells me where I need to begin to target my various levels of intervention. Does that make sense?
Yes. And as a parent, I am a parent, but I'm pretending like, oh my God, how am I going to figure all this stuff out? Well, you may not be able to figure this all out just by looking at the data because Cindy knows it so well. But the most important thing is that you understand word, sentence, passage are the categories that you are analyzing. And because each one of those areas indicates maybe a different level of problems or a combined level of problems.
Yes. Now, one other, you remember how we talked about silent versus oral in the reading?
Yes.
In oral language, I want to think receptive versus expressive. Okay. So I think I've drawn this diagram before, but I'm going to draw it one more time, and then we're going to wind up this video. And the diagram that I draw is part of what we call the language hierarchy at Northwestern University. So we have receptive processes and we have expressive processes. Listening is receptive. Speaking is expressive. Reading is receptive, and writing is expressive. You have to listen to be able to speak. You have to listen to be able to read. You have to speak to be able to write, and you have to read to be able to write. Okay. So often, if I have a problem back here, I see it cascade throughout the entire system. If my problem is here in speaking, I can see those feed into the writing. And again, if I'm thinking, is it a problem listening at the word level? Is it a problem listening at the sentence level? Is it a problem listening at the passage level? Then I can often see those same things repeated in reading. Okay, so let's stop there and we're going to let people digest, and we're going to come back and talk about a couple of other things.
Yeah,